Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, visual effects supervisor Alex Wang, joins us to talk about their work on The Last of Us. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Alex. Hi, Alex. Thank you for joining me today.
Nice to meet you.
I'm excited that we were able to somehow rearrange this. I know I've kind of let you down a couple of times with timings and things going over and all of that. So I really appreciate your patience and joining me today.
Yeah, no worries at all. I get it.
But enough about me. We're here to talk about yourself and we're here to talk about your work on The Last of Us. But before we sort of dive into your work on it, I kind of want to start with like what a VFX supervisor does and what your role is day to day and on set, and just to sort of get a better understanding of what the role entails.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, my job as the visual effects supervisor is to work closely with the director or showrunners studio to ensure that the creative vision is achieved through the use of visual effects. And that process starts very early on from early prep, working with the art department to every day of the shoot. In any shots, scenes that require visual effects, I'm there. So it's a lot of sort of work and preparation even before we have the cameras rolling, working with every department from cinematographers to, like I said, the art department to props department, just making sure that, because many times people don't understand what we do and what we can do. It's either everything or very little. So I'm there to help guide and advise how we can approach a scene to have the best outcome in post. So really, I start early in prep all the way down to I'm probably the last man standing with the director in post-production.
So I guess the sort of term "fix it in post" gives you shudders, and you're probably thinking, actually, how much more work that's going to create for me.
Yeah, that definitely it's kind of an ongoing joke throughout my entire career, actually. It's there's things that you definitely need to do in post. I will be the first to admit that. But yeah, that's definitely I always wanted to, maybe one day I'll get that t-shirt made and fix it in post.
That is always a joke going around on the set when something goes wrong and it's like, oh, we didn't get this. It's like, fine, we'll fix it in post. And I'm sure that is a joke that you probably just think, oh, please, anything but that. It's like not even the lowest hanging fruit of jokes. Just like, please stop. Enough, enough.
It's not even fix it in post anymore. It's just my name. It's like when something's wrong, it's like, Alex, can you do this? What can, what can you do here?
Can you work your magic on this?
Yeah, yeah, everything.
Well, no, I think the idea as well, like I was thinking about this earlier about like once you sort of discussed about VFX supervisor, and it kind of ties in with one of the questions later on. It's like I always think of it as like when a VFX supervisor works, it reminds me of Inception as the dream builder, how every detail that you guys have to put into the screen, it's not just what's captured with, the cameras and production design, but I just think of it as like the idea of when you have even the sort of carpet that's going to be put in that you might not add in post, but it could be added by the set deck. But I could just picture you guys building it up to then have it like projected on screens and have it shown on TV as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. What I love about my job essentially is the attention to detail. We take the lead from at least my approach is I love to take the lead from what is practical. What is the art department doing? What is prosthetics doing? And then rather than reinventing the wheel, use that as the visual guide. Everything down to the detail, like you said, it might be the carpet, the what color, what wallpaper is used on the walls. Those are all the details that for good visual effects to be seamless, we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think as audiences we're slightly spoiled now with what we have in terms of visual effects and what we see on screen, and how much technology is constantly changing that and the idea of what you can create. Like even now, because I was looking at your the other films that you worked on, so stuff like Terminator. Before, when you'd see Terminator 2, there was a lot of practical stuff, and I'm sure in the latest Terminator there is as well, but there's other factors like the de-aging and even certain stunts where in explosions where you might not need to spend weeks, you might not need to spend days rigging something. Now you can kind of just add it in via post.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that. I mean, technology has advanced to the point where we can just do everything. But that doesn't, the thing I always like to say is that doesn't mean we should do everything, right? There's just things, and it really depends on the project as well, and what is the visual style, and what is the feel and the tone of that project. Because my taste is really having seamless visual effects and grounded. And so with that in mind, anytime there's a question of should we do this practically, my answer is always going to be yes, because I think visual effects is best serviced through augmentation. So if there's something that is real and tangible there, it's a good reference, even if we have to replace it, but it's just something tangible there for us to use as a guide. And it really helps take out some of that sort of time iterations for us. A lot of times it just becomes, how many iterations can we get until we run out of time and money, right? So I think if we have reference there, it cuts down, maybe it's one iteration, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10 iterations. So it's just, for me, that's sort of in my mind, I'm always calculating that. So, and I never want to waste somebody's time if they said, well, we can do this practical explosion, or you can do it in visual effects. And I never say, let's just do it practically for the sake of doing it practically, because I know it's a lot of time and money for special effects to do anything. Anything and what we do in film is time and money. So I think just the ability to sort of say, yes, I'm actually going to use that, and we should do it practically is always something that I say.
Well, I like that idea of approach, because it's not just, as you said before, it's like even though you can do it, you shouldn't always do it. And that feels very sort of, when I hear that, it reminds me of like the Jurassic Park quote with Jeff Goldblum's character when he was talking about how they've cloned the dinosaurs, that even though you can do it, you shouldn't be doing it. And I guess as well with like, because there's, over decade, not a decade, so over a century of filmmaking, there's so much practical elements of it. It's like sometimes you should not be removing that part of, like, not necessarily like the traditional side of it, but I guess the magic side of it.
Yeah,
When it comes to filmmaking.
exactly. For me, filmmaking is just more collaborative between all the departments rather than, and there's a time and place. I've enjoyed working on projects that is 80 to 90% visual effects. It just depends on the project. But for me personally, my taste is always a very seamless sort of handshake between all the practical and visual effect departments.
So moving on to our topic, which is The Last of Us, taken the sort of internet by storm. I think it's one of the few shows on HBO where the viewership has gone up each episode, which is incredible to think in a sort of time now where you have so much streaming going on. People can, record the show and then watch it later on. The fact that people are viewing it live, it just shows a testament of how captivating the show was. Before we get to the beginning, how have you found the reaction to the show? And, are you taken aback by how people are reacting to your work?
Yeah, I mean, Bobby, I tell you what, I've been doing visual effects for 20 years now, and I've worked on big projects, small projects, medium-sized projects, and I have never, never experienced something like The Last of Us. It's just really, it's been tremendous. I feel really fortunate and lucky to be a part of this project. I'm a huge fan of the game. So that is one of the reasons why I really wanted to get on this project. And I've been a fan of HBO forever. I love all of their shows. So when I found out that HBO was doing The Last of Us, as a fan, even if I didn't get on the show, I would have loved to just been a viewer. So it's been wonderful it's always wonderful to work so hard on a project. We shot in Calgary for a year, and then we had post. Every step of the process was rewarding but difficult, and in a good way, challenging. So it's always nice that it's been so well received.
I just think when I look online, the sort of critical reception of it all is just wow. Like I just feel like this is the kind of show that doesn't, what's it called? It's the kind of show that it's like of the time, and it's part of that zeitgeist where you had the popularity of the game, and then now it's a show, and it doesn't feel like there's been a show like this that's created this sort of different buzz and attention by doing it week to week, and just how much stronger like each episode gets, and the sort of discussions that people are having online about it, and the I don't know, it's very hard to sort of describe in words how it's done.
I agree. A lot of it I give credit to Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, the creators of the show. They just know how to captivate the audience. When I read the scripts in the very beginning during prep, I knew this was going to be special. I didn't know it was going to be this special, but I knew that this was going to be special. And I feel like the show took off after episode 3 with Bill and Frank's story, because it's very relevant and it's just such a beautiful love story. There's a lot of invisible visual effects, but as just sort of a fan of entertainment and storytelling, filmmaking, that was just such a beautiful episode. And I think that's when the broader audience really took notice of, oh, this show is not just another show about a video game. This is something that is actually really touching and well done.
Yeah, and that's such a loving and tender episode where you're right, it's not you steering away from the main characters of Joel and Ellie. You've created a sort of a window into other people's lives during this time, and how actually sometimes something like this is like the best thing that could happen to you in a weird, morbid way.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, if the outbreak never happened, they would have probably never met and they would have never had this love story. So I think it's just the subtleties. I think the beautiful thing about the entire show for me, and this sort of plays into even for visual effects on the show, is the subtleties. It's always about less is more. We don't want to sort of have visuals everywhere where the audience is overwhelmed and doesn't know where to look, doesn't know how to feel, where it's just sort of consistent. Like, look at this giant building that's collapsed. Now look at this explosion. Now look at this. It's more about just setting this tone of where it's just a slow pace, where you honestly, to the point where you believe that we're in that world, but you forget about the visual effects, and then suddenly you're reminded, oh wow, we're actually in the post-apocalyptic world. That's sort of when I feel like we're successful.
The seamlessness stitch of your work, sort of, and others as well, flowing through, which I might put a pin in that because we'll come back later on to that. But you mentioned earlier that you're a fan of the game, and I guess when it came around, you were quite, interested into sort of jumping on. How did the project come about for you? And I think the answer for this part is self-explanatory. And what made you want to take it on?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when the game came out, I think it was 2013, and I played it. I'm not a huge gamer. When I play games, when I dedicate that time, I want to make sure it's good. I've put down so many games in my life where halfway through I'm like, this is not for me, or I just ran out of time. And The Last of Us, I would have to say it's probably the first game that I stayed up till midnight, 1 a.m. playing through. I woke up in the morning, and I think that I dreamt about the game because I was so into it. And And when I woke up, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I wanted to continue to play. And I was just really captivated by the storytelling and the visuals. Yeah, obviously, the visuals come into play for me. Just a world that I've never seen a video game portray a post-apocalyptic world so beautifully. And obviously, the surprises of the arcs of the storytelling between Joel and Ellie and Tess and all the people that they kind of meet along their journey. I've never experienced that through a game. So flash forward, 10 years later, I'm hearing that The Last of Us is shooting Calgary. They're looking for a visual effects supervisor. I was at ILM at the time, and the timing was perfect because I was just wrapping up on Jurassic World, the third installment, and it meant that the only downside was it meant I couldn't take a break before jumping on. But I mean, that opportunity, I would have done anything to be a part of. So when the opportunity came, it became a no-brainer for me to be a part of it.
I'm the same as you when it comes to video games. Sometimes there's the staples that you'll have. So like a sports game or something that you could play amongst friends or Call of Duty. But then there's always those narrative-based games where you want to you lose yourself in, and then you don't know where the time's gone. You think it's whatever 6 o'clock in the evening, and then you blink, it's midnight, and you're like, oh, I need to go to bed because I've got work tomorrow, or I've got some event to go to. And I think those games are the sort of special games that come with it. I guess as well, when you have an opportunity that comes up as well, when you want to work on something, sometimes you just think, this is my one shot, I'm going to go for it, let's go get it and let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was I think it was fate. I just sort of I couldn't believe it when I had that opportunity, and I just sort of allowed things to fall in line, right? And one thing led to another, and everything worked out. And next thing you know, I was moving to Calgary for a year, which was okay with my wife because we live in Vancouver and Calgary isn't that far, so she was very supportive of that.
Shouts out to Mrs. Wong for that as well, for letting you do that. I think as well, it's very, as you said as well, reading things and seeing how special the scripts are. I think that always sort of will unlock some sort of the fire in you to come up more, to make sure that you bring your A game to it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was a huge fan of Chernobyl. I love that TV show. So the stars kind of aligned for me when I heard it was HBO, it was The Last of Us, and it was Craig Mason. I just knew that the way that the story was told, and the use of visual effects in that show, that The Last of Us was going to be great. Just because it wasn't going to be what I said, which is look at all the scope, these drone helicopter views of a post-apocalyptic world. Isn't that sad? It was going to be none of that. It was going to be a very subtle use of, I would say, subtle use of visual effects, even though there's a lot of visual effects, but subtlety in the way that the camera worked for visual effects.
Yeah, I think as with Chernobyl as well, like what an amazing show that is. How much subtlety that they had to put into it and rebuild to make things look like Ukraine in the 80s, which is just, again, blows your mind that you see this on screen. It's like on a TV show, the sort of detail that goes into it.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
I was going to say what sums up Craig Mason in a nutshell is in Chernobyl, when the explosion goes off, when the nuclear reactor explodes, one would expect this massive visual effects shot where we are close up and you see explosions, maybe a couple different cameras, cut to cut to cut. No, he did it in a way where it's the couple in the window standing there, and you just see this little glimpse of an explosion off far in the distance, and then the shake. Right, I thought that was genius. The way that he told that story.
I think it's like that, very much like it's not about the explosion, it's about the people that it's going to affect. And then you have those ideas of, that family just sort of everybody just sleeping, minding their own business. And then, as you said, in the distance, you see something.
Yeah, exactly. It's It's and you nailed it right there. It's for Craig, whether it's Chernobyl or it's The Last of Us, it's always about the characters, right? The visual effects, every department is there to support the character development and the narrative of the show.
Yeah, exactly. And you guys all kind of brought it all together with that. But with as well, because you work with so many departments on this, you mentioned early on that you're talking of art department. So I can imagine there's a lot of conversations with the production designer. But then there's also the locations department regarding how you're going to set up your sort of big blue and green screens and how not to disrupt the area that you're setting up. But then also talking to DOPs about how they're going to light the scene, because on this screen it's going to be trees, but you want to make sure that the sun is in the right place so they can have everything lit properly. But then also I can imagine prosthetics as well, because you have the big bloater, the clickers. You're going to have to sort of not necessarily airbrush, but add in extra bits to them in post. Where do you begin and how do you sort of cater for each department? And on top of that, not get your head exploding from all these sort of different conversations.
I mean, it helps that every department, I love working with every head of department, right? But of the list that you sort of said there, which is all very, very much correct, that's one of the reasons why I do love for visual effects, because I get to collaborate literally with almost every department. But I think for me, the most important has always been the DP, because I have to know the way the tone of the show through the lens is set by them. And I want to support that through visual effects. I don't want to do something different and set a different tone, because I think you'll be able to tell when something doesn't feel quite right. It's always sort of that sort of miscommunication between DPs and visual effects. So on this show, I worked with multiple very talented DPs. They were going for this very docu-style sort of handheld camera approach, which meant that the visual effects needed to be very grounded. They used a lot of natural light, which I always love, because it actually helps the visual effects when it's natural light. And really, because we had so many different DPs on the show, we had two main ones, but there are multiple DPs on the show. I needed to make sure that the visual effects was cohesive for the entire season. So working closely with them from prep to understanding their style, doing previs with them, working with previs with them, storyboarding to make sure that I understand what the camera angles are and what they're going for. So that sort of everything starts from storyboards. That kind of helps me get a glimpse of what their vision is. And then from there, I can say, oh, I think we're going for a wider 25 mil there. We'll need a blue screen there because that's going to be singing onto set. So that kind of transcends downwards that way. And then I'll work with production designer very closely with the production designer as to what his style is and his aesthetics is for the set. And I have to sort of have a common visual language with him as well. And also a lot of the conversation is what can be done practically, what sets can be built, whether it's in the foreground or in the midground, and then where does visual effects take over. For visual effects to be successful, those conversations need to they need to happen really early on so that there's a plan. So I think where visual effects becomes a little bit it becomes tricky for us and sometimes less successful is when it becomes a bandage, right? Oh, something didn't work out. Then last minute, let's just, like as we talked about, fix it in post. You can kind of, at least for me, I can start to tell when things were decided later on or things weren't planned out as well. You can kind of see it through the end product, really just because time is limited. Time and budget is limited, right? So I think getting as much planning ahead of time and having everyone on the same page from every department, that's what really leads to the best end product.
I think I saw another video with in terms of going to like the production design, just how much is being built and how much is put in, and but then you see the little integral details that you guys put in. So like a fallen building, for example, or when Ellie was walking across the planks. I think it's in episode 2, and you have the sort of backdrop of Boston behind them. It's those things, and I guess that's you guys' magic of like stitching it all in to make it all look seamless, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we for that scene when she's walking the plank, which is a very famous scene in the video game. If you anyone who plays the video game, the original game, remembers that scene because first there's the collapsed tower, and then Ellie's famous line of "That was scary. This is wood." Right? I think that just shows her personality, and so we wanted to make sure that we did the game justice. We're always kind of walking that thin line of respecting the game, but also we have to create something that is meant for the TV show as well.
I think you just created a perfect segue to my next question, where because yeah, the show is based on a game, it's a pre-existing property. Where do you begin in wanting to sort of design the world? Because you obviously have images that are iconic to the game, and you kind of want to use that look and feel, but you don't want to create a carbon copy. Do you sort of just start from scratch with each department and with Craig, the showrunner, and Neil, in terms of like that this is a complete different medium, we need to focus on it on a completely different way?
Well, I think it's kind of all the above, honestly. The game, we're creating the show really because of the game, right? At the end of the day, the game was so great. So we pulled inspiration from the game. I think as a foundation for visually, I always had the book on my by my desk because I always just kind of flip through it just to remind myself what the visual language we're trying to go for. Now, not every time things can translate directly from the game to our show, but I think it's always there as a visual inspiration for us. And then I follow the lead of the production designer as to see what his aesthetic style is for that scene, and he obviously works very closely with Craig Mazin and Neil to sort of understand what their vision is. Ultimately, it's what their vision is, but it's very collaborative because with Craig and Neil, it's never a situation where they said it has to be this and that's it. It's very collaborative. Of they sometimes will just say things that they want to feel and things that they want to sort of feel in that scene, whether it's color, it could be a collapsed building, things like that. And then we'll go out there and then we'll find locations and we'll sort of do concept art, put the concepts in front of Craig and Neil to sort of get a buy off and understand whether that's where their heads at.
It is, I guess, like the easy way would be just to do a carbon copy of what you've seen and what's people are experienced before. And I guess as an audience member, you could probably just YouTube a walkthrough tutorial of the game. But as like a simple way. But I guess with when you're going on like a TV and having it in a complete different medium, you want those people who have played the game not to be like, oh, this is this is that. But I guess they'll have an idea of what the story beats are. But visually, it's like let's give them something different to sort of get their teeth into.
Yeah, I mean, with the game, it's a whole different medium because you're basically in control of the character that you're following, and you can stop, look around. You don't have to go to the next character right away. You can just stand there, or you can sort of go backwards. So it's sort of a very interactive medium. Whereas I think with the show, we have to follow certain rules of telling that story, certain characters. So with that in mind, we're always looking through the camera lens. So it's really important to respect that.
Yeah, and as you said as well, when you're working with those DOPs, because they're the first people who will take in that, what's it called, take in that visual world, you also sort of want to be able to take in something new, and as you said, with the practicality of what you're creating as well.
Yeah, we wanted to respect the game, but also create something fresh, right? We definitely, and I think we succeeded in that. Is fans of the game don't feel like this was a carbon copy of the game. Although some wish I know on Twitter some wish it was, but I think just the fact that from Craig, he is about telling purely about telling story of characters, which means in the game for just it simply to be more entertaining, you're going to have a lot more action, right? There's just a lot more time in a game that you have to go through obstacles. Otherwise, I think the game would be rather boring as a medium of a game. So I think for our show, we never steered away from everything was definitely had an intention of telling the story about the characters of the show.
Yeah, and I think with the game, you could probably have a countless amount of hours whilst on TV. You're quite restricted with how much time you can have. But saying that, because this is basically because the show is 9 episodes long, how different is your approach to how you work when it comes to episodic TV? Because with the show being so cinematic, it must feel like you're working on 9 films at once.
Yeah, I mean, for my better part of my career, it's always been feature film. So The Last of Us was my first episodic in my career, working on a episodic. So it is an entirely different beast when you compare it to a feature film, especially on a level of The Last of Us, where the demand from all of us, but definitely from Craig and Neil and HBO, is that this needs to be at a very top quality show. So many times it does feel like it did feel like I was working on 9 little feature films because the bar had to be set so high. There's definitely sort of technical aspects of episodics that's very different from a feature film where we're shooting constantly. We had, I think, 20-day of shoot per episode. So we have prep. And then once we start shooting, it's just this snowball downhill of you're shooting one episode and then another one, and then you're prepping and then you're shooting and you're prepping and you're shooting. And that goes for post as well. Once you start into post production and you're delivering each episode, you're basically one after the other, right? You have probably a week of buffer between episodes. So the planning is very different between the two. There's stuff obviously similarities at the end of the day, but for me, what I notice is the planning. There needs to be more planning. Is where I'm trying to get at. And but the planning is very different between when it comes to delivering the show from a post production standpoint.
Working in TV, as you said, it's even though you're shooting one episode, you're planning for the next one, and then you're soft planning for the next one, and it's kind of slightly never ending in a way because it just comes at you thick and fast, and as you said, snowballing. So there's probably a lot to think about where you have to think about episode 1 that's just been shot, but then episode 2 might be shooting, and then what's happening with episode 3 when we're doing recce's here? And then we still have to keep an eye out for episode 4 because that'll come around the corner straight away.
Yeah, it's definitely exactly that. It's all of that. Especially if I'm shooting one episode and I know 2 episodes down, it's a very heavy visual effects episode. I have to start planning for that episode way ahead in advance. Questions of how many blue screens, how big of a blue screen, can we shoot here in this location? Does this work for you? From every department, a lot of planning goes into that, and it can become quite a lot when you're sort of shooting and planning at the same time. But I was very fortunate to have a great team. Sean Nolan, my VFX producer on the show, was the backbone of my department, our department, I should say. And I had a second unit visual effects supervisor, Blaine, who sort of we split our times in when I had to either be in a prep meeting or then he would be on set, or if he was in a meeting, I would be on set with shooting. So it's a huge undertaking, but it's definitely a group effort.
100%. And I think you see that with all the names in the credits, that the sort of the army that it takes to create these shows, films, for people's entertainment is incredible. And it's the same with looking at when you do look at the credits and go on IMDb. In the VFX section, there's also a number of VFX companies that get involved in the process, which like leads me to a question of like, how does the workflow get split up between these different companies? Do certain companies specialize in certain things? So let's say, for example, one company is very good at the placement of trees or the use of trees, or another company is really good at creating monsters, for example. And how do you decide to go with these different vendors?
So last year, I would say the last couple of years, it was insane with the amount of streaming work. Just between streaming and feature films, it was very busy for everyone, but especially for visual effects. So Sean and I were really worried about just not being able to find vendors that had capacity for us. But what we found was we're very lucky that everyone was huge fans of The Last of Us, and they wanted to be on the show. So what that meant was also just finding the best, most well-suited vendors for the type of work. We obviously have a lot of environment work on The Last of Us. I would say predominantly our environments is probably our biggest visual effects challenge on the show. DNEG, who I have very close relationship with. I've worked there before. Craig has a very close relationship with DNEG, they were on Chernobyl with him. And they, in my mind, and Craig in my mind, specialize in environments. They do great visual effects everywhere, but I think they definitely are great at environments. So it was natural to sort of have them on board. A great story about Weta, which everyone knows, is that Dave Conley, who is a longtime executive producer at Weta, reached out. He's a huge fan of the game, and I mean huge fan. I love the game, but Dave has played the game multiple times, both games in the super, I don't even know what it's called, like the super difficult setting. And he knows, he was telling me when we were on a call, I remember him just saying like, oh yeah, when this happens and this, I was like, wow, this man, he is what we call a super fan. So we're very fortunate. And he just wanted in some capacity to be a part of this special project. So I think for me, it was just relationships, past relationships with studios like DNEG, Weta, Distillery. So I think it's either I've known their work to be fantastic, or I just have a past relationship with them. That's kind of how we developed that. And on this show, we had over 3,000 visual effects shots. I think people will be surprised to hear that we had that many, but we had over 3,000, and we had 16 vendors on the show as well.
Wow, that's quite a lot of people sort of branching out and working on the show. I think it's quite interesting to hear as well the idea of like you have the one company that are great at landscapes and environments, because as great as you have the two characters that are central to the story, the environment itself is the whole character as well, in terms of just I guess in the earlier episodes of how how nature is, and how even though even though it's been hit the world and like all the humans have died out pretty much, you can feel like nature's healing itself by how green and lush the cities look. But then you feel the brutality of that world as well when they have those sort of winter months and they're walking through those snowy landscapes, and you can feel just how like sort of dark and dingy it all is.
Yeah, I think it's easy to, I wouldn't say easy, but it's sort of a theme of for a post-apocalyptic world to feel very cold and dreary and sad. I think one of the reasons why the game for me visually was so stunning was because, yes, it was sad, especially when cities were bombed out, but it was so beautiful at the same time. The game had this visual aspect of just using natural light, sunset light, warm light. It really played off on the lush green that you say, and the overgrowth. And you can kind of see the over what it's so what is that overgrown on? Oh, it's a collapsed building from a bomb that went off 20 years ago with the outbreak. So it's sort of how deep that is, rather than just being like, oh, look at this world, it's so sad and it's devastated. I think that's one of the things that was one of the number one priorities that I remember that feeling, and I wanted to capture that and make sure that that was as part of the visual effects in the show.
As you mentioning like that there's overgrowth, there's like the luscious greens. There's some sort of post-apocalyptic shows that forget about that, and you kind of see like the grass has been cut, and you think, well, hang on a second, I thought everybody had died out, so who's still cutting grass in this sort of day and age?
Yeah, we definitely. I mean, we were shooting in locations where obviously we couldn't control when somebody could sort of mow their lawn, and really that's one aspect where I said, okay, yeah, that'll be visual effects. We'll add some grass. We'll add some overgrown grass, right? So, yeah.
It's just one of those sort of smaller details that people would miss, and is important to sort of bringing that audience member into that world. What I'm curious to know about as well is that I know you mentioned you picked up on it about fixing it in post, but is there things where you might have changed in post from what you'd shot because of certain other factors involved? So, for example, if we have something like sound design, the sound designers will create something that's quite menacing, but on screen the visual is not as menacing. So I guess something with like the clickers and bloaters, it's not that, that image won't change as much, but something like, I'm not sure, let's just say, for example, in episode 8, when they meet the cannibals, when you're adding sort of stuff in post there, do other departments in post sort of change the way that you work and what you're going to create?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sound in post, sound and visual effects have to be in sync because the sound is so. Craig cares probably more about sound than visuals. I mean, he cares about both a lot, but I would say sound even more so. And what he cares about is the subtleties, all of the subtleties of sound. So for visual effects, we have to embrace and support those sound elements. With that, for a very simple example, is in the steakhouse that you speak of with the cannibals. When the steakhouse is on fire, we have to listen to the sound and understand, okay, this is the sound that we're using. Our fire sort of needs to support that. And it's hand in hand. So we would have, if we already have some work in progress fires that Craig feels like it's the right amount, maybe visually isn't there yet, but it's the right amount, we would send that over to the sound department, and then they would update their sound. And so it's very collaborative sort of workflow between sound and visual effects. A really good example where sound actually bailed us out is in episode 2 when Joel, Tess, and Ellie are in the museum, and they're kind of fighting the clickers. There's a scene where Joel needs to reload his bullets, and the clicker is kind of far on the screen left side of Joel, approaching Joel. And that's a fully CG clicker there. And we struggled with that animation for a long time just because I think we were over animating and performance just wasn't exactly what Craig was looking for. And one day he was looking at this, he said, it's not quite there. And he said, what you should do is grab the sound clip from sound, because he went to go see the sound. He was just the sound design department before coming to visual effects. And he said, you should grab that sound clip, and I think that'll help the animator on this shot. And sure enough, we grabbed it and we could hear the subtle sounds that the clicker was making. And the next iteration of animation, Craig loved it and it was approved.
Big shout out to Chris Tahoon and Chris Battaglia, who are the sound designers, because I spoke to them about it. And Chris T was talking about the whole clicker sound for that episode and how Craig was sort of maybe add a bit more, add a bit more. Wait, no, take away, add a bit more, take away. So then to hear that there was that collaboration where they were building that sound up for you guys to then come in with your clicker as well. It was quite funny to hear.
Yeah.
And also that like that sort of collaboration that you wouldn't really think of in terms of how like even how big sound design plays and how you get an idea of an image just through from sound. So you close your eyes and then you picture just how big a fire will be, or how big an explosion could be, or even the feel of the naturalistic world around you.
Yeah, sound is a huge part of immersing the audience into the visuals. If you just have fire on its own with no sound, you're taken out of it. But with the sound effects and everything else, I think that's how you immerse the audience.
As you delve more into understanding filmmaking, you realize how important sound is in terms of creating that world and bringing people in. Because I think my lecturer once said the audience will forgive if the picture goes off a little bit, because they can say that it's the projector, it's something else, there's a scratch on the DVD, maybe dust on the VHS tape. But with sound, if something's wrong, that's it, you're out as an audience member.
Yeah, and you definitely can pick up on it. It's sound is so important as it's editing, in post, it's a whole different sort of side of what's more important. We're just a small piece of an important piece, but a small piece of everything that goes into post-production. But for me, sound and editing is key.
100%. Just to sort of hit to my penultimate question, what is the one shot or scene that you're most proud of in terms of a visual effects standpoint?
Ooh, there's good question. There's so many, but if I had to pick one, I'll give you two because they're so different. When in episode 2, when Ellie wakes up and then they exit what we call the hair salon, they're essentially based in the hair salon. That's how the episode starts. Actually, that's how their journey starts. They exit out the hair salon and they see that's the first daytime glimpse that Ellie has of the collapsed building of Open City, Boston. That scene and that environment that DNEG did is amazing. Really, that's one of my favorite shots in the entire season. And then I would say the other one, I just saw it yesterday again because I'm cutting a reel together right now, and is the last shot in the cul-de-sac when the bloater, the scene, the big battle between the infected and the rebels, as Joel, Ellie, Sam, and Henry leave, we have probably one of the few moments in the entire season where the camera sort of just rises and rises and rises. And then it just gives you this full scope of what is happening, right? The infected are still pouring out. The fully digital shot, except for maybe 30 frames at the beginning where the child clicker is still attacking Kathleen. But besides that, it is an entirely CG shot. And I think Weta did a tremendous job with that. It's just such an epic shot. But I can go on and on. The plane crash, like there's just so many. I think all of our creative partners on the show did such a tremendous job visually. And you could see that because people were huge fans of the show, that extra kind of step of care went into from everyone from the artist level to supervision teams. Yeah, you could see.
Yeah, and I think you can see that when each episode with you as an audience member, what your sort of seeing on screen. Episode 1, the plane crash. Episode 2, the luscious greenery. Episode 3 feels like there's a little bit more seamlessness to it in terms of maybe I haven't noticed things, so that's probably slightly on me. But then also good for you, Alex, because it doesn't stand out. And then episode 4 and 5 with the rebels and so on. I think for me, like one of my favorites is probably in episode 7, and this is the when they turn on all the lights and you can see the flickering from the mall all lighting up. And I was speaking to cinematographer Nadeem, who did episode 8 and 9. He was saying that how you took him onto set and showed him on the monitor that image, and that kind of blew me away a little bit with just like, wow, I can't believe they already created that for you guys to see on the monitor and actually get the actors to react to what's happening, not just like a green screen that gets sort of put in later on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's another one of my favorite shots on the show because there's just so many. And I think there's so many not because I feel like there's so many, but because we follow Joel. The whole season is a journey, right? So every episode I feel like is so different. Every episode I almost have a favorite shot. But the mall is special because it for many different reasons. I think because it is a huge collaboration between the art department and visual effects, where we found a mall and locations. We found a mall that they're ready to tear down, and we basically said, "Hang on, we'll use it." And the amount of set dressing that the art department did was insane. And we took it all as reference. And that opening shot where the lights first come on, because it's 2 levels. Basically, our art department, that mall was only 1 level, so they just set dressed the bottom ground level. So that shot is entirely visual effects, is entirely CG, and we shot on a sound stage with a huge blue screen. So for me, that was so important to make sure that what we were going to shoot is exactly what Craig was looking for, because I can't change the lighting on Ellie later on in post if we don't feel like that lighting's right. So we did numerous amounts of previs. I think that's what I showed Nadeem, concept art, previs of the timing of the flickering of the light, and worked really closely with Ksenia, the DP, to make sure that when we're shooting Ellie standing, really the set that was built for that shot was just the railing and then just blue screen. But it was important for me to watch how that light came on and had to really, in my head, envision what the mall was going to look like and to make sure that, okay, that lighting, that timing will work and it will be seamless. And then really kudos to Distillery VFX, who created that mall and did a tremendous job. I think anyone that I talk to you about that mall, that shot, is blown away when I say it's a full CG shot. Like, just from the level of detail that they created for the mall to the finishing with the compositing. Yeah, it is one of my, if I give you 3, I'd say it's one of my favorite top 3 shots for the whole season.
It's also the money shot in the trailer when you see it light up, and
Yeah, colorful.
yeah, and I guess it's that sort of I like to say a bit of hope into these people's lives of just how like life used to be, and the sort of I guess going away from the mundane to what would be like the usual for us by going to the shops and going to these various places like the arcade and going to other and just doing normal shopping.
Yeah, I mean, for Craig, whether it's Ellie looking at Open City for the first time or the mall for the first time, we have to understand it was important for Craig, for us to understand that this is the first time that Ellie is seeing this, right? She's a quarantine zone baby. She grew up in a quarantine zone, so she's never seen the city. She knows nothing of the world that we lived in back in 2003. So to her, this is the world. And for her to see the mall, one of the most important things that Craig wanted was that there needs to be some joy. right? This, when she sees this mall, it's like a wonderland. Even though to us it's like this, we all hate sort of like the mall of the 90s or 80s. Like it's really tacky and the architecture is not great and the lighting's kind of blah and the shops aren't great. But for her, who's never seen a mall before, visually, we wanted to sort of give the audience what she was feeling, which is this pure joy and excitement of seeing this for the first time.
Yeah, and you can see that when you see their faces, and it's funny as well that just that understanding as an audience member that like the even in your mundane life, the little joys of seeing discovering something new and being like, wow, like you can't get enough of it. It's one of those things as well. Sorry, I know that I just there was another one that I wanted to bring up was the giraffe scene.
Oh yeah.
So it's quite funny seeing online people being like, wow, I can't believe they VFX a giraffe. Like, look at that, look at this. And then you see the behind the scenes and it's actually a real giraffe, but everything else around it is VFXed. That must have been a first for you to have like such a majestic animal and then having to sort of have everybody shoot around it and then make sure that you create the correct stuff around it for the backdrop of the city.
That was definitely, the giraffe scene is definitely one of those scenes where I was constantly asked, do we really need to shoot in the zoo and do go through all of this to shoot a giraffe? And my answer every single time was yes, because although technology we've advanced a lot in visual effects, creating an animal is difficult. I think there's definitely still challenges and things. Some things are easier, but a giraffe looks like no other animal on this planet, right? It's almost sort of alien-like to begin with. So I didn't want this uncanny feeling of the giraffe being fully CG the entire time, because even if we create the most spectacular CG giraffe, which in some shots we definitely did, because we actually blended between a CG giraffe and a live action. I think if people knew that it was always a fully CG giraffe, it would have been, there would always would have been something that it just looked uncanny. So again, really supportive from the producers and the art department, everyone on the show, for us to essentially build a set in the Calgary Zoo so that we could shoot some shots with Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey in the zoo. They're feeding the giraffe. And I wanted to, my vision was to sort of blend between a CG giraffe and a real giraffe, just to, so that the audience could never really tell, like, oh, was that real? Was that not? Was that, so, and also just having that reference, because honestly, when we're shooting, I don't know if it's going to work out, because you're just hoping for the best. We couldn't really control lighting in the zoo, so there were definitely a lot of obstacles. I hope for the best, and I'm glad that we actually used the footage, but I was mentally prepared that if we had to go down a route of using a fully CG giraffe, we at least could reference a real giraffe, and that'll kind of buy us some time with the iterations.
So obviously the rules are like you shouldn't work with kids or animals on set, and then going for like a giraffe, which is probably one of in terms of like height wise, one of the tallest animals out there to work with, and just then working your way around it, but also making sure that the animal's calm
Yeah,
and not to sort of like be respectful towards them.
yeah, and the other main reason why I really wanted to shoot with a real giraffe for some of those feeding scenes is that scene in the game is much like when Ellie walks the plank. It's another, if probably the most iconic scene in the game, when she first sees a giraffe, and the importance of that scene for her, for Ellie as a character, just having what happened in the steakhouse, to just, this is sort of like a bit of hope for her, right? And I wanted to have that rawness with a real animal and the interaction with Bella. That sort of, as good of an animator as we could have had the best animator on the planet, but we would have been working with the performance of Bella had we just gotten like a green stuffy of a giraffe. I think the performance would have been very different. So I think having a live, real animal interact with Bella just felt more sincere to me.
Yeah, totally. And just makes it back to your sort of mantra of using being practical and making sure that it looks perfect, good, right on screen. Just to wrap it up with my final question, you're stuck in a post-apocalyptic world. What is one item that you would have from your sort of VFX days or working that you would have with you to get through?
I tell you what, in a post-apocalyptic world, I would not be thinking about visual effects. I would, that's the last thing on my mind. I think I would, flashlight and batteries would probably be the way to go. And yeah, and then anything else, my dog, my wife. I mean, I should clarify my wife, my dog, and a flashlight in that order.
It's like for the audience members, we see Mrs. Wong just behind Alex, so we know that he had to reorder that.
Exactly.
Alex, thank you so much for your time today. The Last of Us is streaming now on HBO in the US, on Now TV, and Sky Atlantic in the UK. If you haven't seen it and you've listened to this episode, sorry for the spoilers, but make sure you go out and watch it and enjoy it and see Alex's work. Thank you again, Alex.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Thank you. You take care and bye bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.